Okay, I am fed and I'm ready to roll. Let's get this puppy rolling. So, here's that person who we were watching's YouTube channel, Jessica McCabe. Great story she had there. I wanted to watch it the whole way through. We will do that in class. Watch it the whole way through. But here is her YouTube channel. It is a popular one. She has 1.39 million subscribers. And her most recent video appeared to be a day ago. So she looks like she posts regularly in regards to ADHD. So if you're interested in some stuff in regards to that, looks like she's a good channel to go to. Let's go on with our slideshow. So there's that TED Talk. I don't want to watch that again. All right, there we go. So, in life, we all give ourselves accommodations in order to make ourselves work. What accommodations do you give yourself? Do you set your clock 5 minutes fast? Or maybe you put in multiple snooze buttons, such as I do. Do you have notes or 3x5 cards for important meetings? Do you have to post notes on your door? These come from knowing ourselves, what we are good at, and what we continue to have challenges in time management, working memory, and sustained attention. Harken back to what we were discussing with executive functioning skills. Let's take a microscopic look at the ADHD ADD umbrella. Some of the things we're going to talk about here go hand in hand with what McCabe stated in her video there. She mentioned the inattentive type. Inattentive people who have ADHD generally have challenges with sustaining attention long enough, especially boring or tedious or repetitive challenges or tasks. Challenges include resisting distraction and trouble with sufficient attention, especially to details and organization. The hyperactivity type, or the one that Jessica stated in her video, are the ones who are most likely to get diagnosed, are more active than typically developed peers, even during sleep, is often on the go, or acts as if driven by a motor, often talks excessively, and often has difficulty playing or engaging in leisure activities quietly. If you remember Josh, when we were doing that particular little comic strip in regards to executive functioning, he went and kicked a goal on his own team. Kind of that same idea there. I have a student in my classroom who does that kind of thing. Impulsive type. They act without fully considering the circumstances or the consequences. Has a hard time delaying gratification and often speaks out of turn, interrupts others, and engages in risk-taking behavior. Raise the hand. Raise the hand multiple times. Pick me, pick me. We all have those type of things happening with our students. What causes these things? A neurologically based disorder caused by a deficiency of a specific neurotransmitter, norepinephrine, and or its precursors, DOA and dopamine, the pleasure centers of the body. Let's take a quick look of a video of the brain.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gerald Chodak. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or ADHD, is a term many of us have probably heard before. But what does it actually mean? Simply put, ADHD is a common behavioral disorder that emerges in children before the age of 7. It can extend into adolescence and even adulthood. ADHD was first identified as a disorder in 1902. And for years, doctors believed it was the result of serious brain damage. While that theory has since been proven wrong, the precise causes of ADHD are still unknown. What we do know is that the occurrence of ADHD is closely tied to biological factors such as the size and density of various brain structures, and the way chemical reactions take place within the brain. For example, scientists have discovered that children with ADHD often have a smaller cortex, the part of the brain that controls thought and action. This diminished size usually occurs in the area of the cortex known as the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is an especially important part of the brain, playing a role in many key functions, including impulse control, socialization, reason, and judgment. Experts believe this may help explain why some children with ADHD are more prone to drifting off, making sudden outbursts, or using poor judgment. Other research into ADHD has focused on nerve tissue in different areas of the brain. It appears that in children with ADHD, this nerve tissue is smaller or sometimes thinner than in normal children of the same age. While scientists aren't yet certain as to why, they believe these variations can affect a child's attention and impulse control. In addition to the physical differences in brain structure, many experts believe that people with ADHD, like those with depression, have chemical differences as well. Some studies have shown that children with ADHD have lower amounts of the neurotransmitter dopamine in the brain. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that carry information to and from nerve cells. Since dopamine plays a key role in the proper functioning of the cortex, not having enough of it could interfere with cognitive processes such as focusing and attention, the very same processes that people with ADHD struggle with. And though it's still being tested, the so-called dopamine theory seems to be supported by the fact that stimulants, which are often used to treat ADHD symptoms, work by increasing dopamine levels. Scientists still don't know the exact causes of ADHD, but much progress has been made. The more they discover about the roots of the disorder, the better equipped they'll be to develop more effective methods for understanding, diagnosing, and treating this common ailment.
It is a strange thought to think that having stimulants will help people get, quote unquote, slow down in order to be able to function, quote unquote, normally, if you will, in regards to ADHD. I'm more of the opinion of Lady Gaga, I was born this way, if you catch my drift. Going on, if my thing would work. I hate this about these slides. I hate this about these slides. Let's just go over here, shall we? No, stop. There we go. Okay. If it's brain-based, is it a learning disability? No. A learning disability is caused by different wiring in the cortex of the brain. The result is difficulty processing information. In regards to learning disabilities, a learning disability makes the learner unable to learn in a typical way. A learning disability can improve with special education services that include remedial interventions, teaching compensatory strategies, and accommodations. Medication is not helpful in treating a learning disability. Without intervention, a learning disability will not improve as the student grows. ADHD makes the student less available for learning because of activity level, inattention, attention to everything, and or impulsiveness. Special education services will not help minimize the impact of ADHD. Changes in how instruction is delivered, as well as accommodations and supports, will help a student develop compensatory strategies. Medication may make a student more available for learning. It may also diminish over time as the brain develops. This is a controversial idea. Diagnosis. So we're going to get in some heavy stuff here. Hyperactivity, impulsive type. 6 or more of the hyperactivity or impulsiveness symptoms must be present in order to be considered in the hyperactive impulsive type. So, here's the DSM criteria for that. hyperactivity and impulsivity, 6 or more symptoms of hyperactivity or impulsivity for children up to age 16 years, or 5 or more for adolescents aged 17 years and older adults. Symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsivity have been present for at least 6 months to an extent that is disruptive and inappropriate for the person's developmental level. These things may include often fidgets with or taps hand or feet or squirms in seat, often leaves seats in situations when remaining seated is expected, often runs about or climbs in situations where it is not appropriate. Adolescents or adults may be limited to feeling restless. An individual might often be unable to play or take part in leisure activities quietly, is often on the go, acting as if driven by a motor, often talks excessively, often blurts out an answer before a question has been completed, often has trouble waiting their turn, or often interrupts or intrudes on others, also known as butting into conversations or games. In addition, the following conditions must be met. Several inattentive or hyperactive impulsive symptoms were present before age 12 years. Several symptoms are present in 2 or more settings, such as the home, school, or work, with friends or relatives, or in other activities. There is clear evidence that the symptoms interfere with or reduce the quality of social, school, or work functioning, and the symptoms are not better explained by another medical disorder, such as a mood disorder, an anxiety disorder, dissociative disorder, or a personality disorder. The symptoms do not happen only during the course of schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder. The combined type. 6 or more of the intention plus of the inattention plus 6 or more hyperactivity or impulsiveness symptoms must be present. It is possible for someone who has ADHD to have all 3 of those particular forms of ADHD. The DSM criteria for this: inattention, 6 or more symptoms of inattention for children of age 16 years. Same level as we talked about before, but here's the criteria for this. They often fail to give close attention to details or make careless mistakes in schoolwork, at work, or with other activities. Often have trouble holding attention on tasks or play activities. Often does not seem to listen when spoken to directly. Often does not follow through on instructions and fails to finish schoolwork, chores, or duties in the workplace. Often has trouble organizing tasks and activities. Often avoids, dislikes, or is reluctant to do tasks that require mental effort for a long period of time. Often loses things necessarily for tasks and activities. Is often easily distracted and is often forgetful in daily activities. And hyperactivity and impulsivity. Often fidgets with or taps hands or feet, or often squirms in seat. Often leaves seat in situations when remain seated is expected. Often runs about or climbs in situations where it is not appropriate. Often unable to play or take part in leisure activities quietly. Is often on the go, acting as driven by a motor. Often talks excessively. Often blurts out an answer before a question has been completed. Often has trouble waiting their turn and often interrupts or intrudes others. The following conditions must be met. Several inattentive or hyperactive impulsive symptoms were present before age 12. Several symptoms are present in 2 or more settings. There is clear evidence that the symptoms interfere with or reduce the quality of social, school, and work functioning, and the symptoms are not better explained by another mental disorder. Lots of things there in regards to ADHD that can be diagnosed for all the multiple forms of it. In order to receive a medical diagnosis, there must be clear evidence of significant difficulty in 2 or more settings, that is typically home, school, work, or with peers. Symptoms of inattention, hyperactivity, or impulsiveness must be present for at least 6 months. Some of these symptoms have to cause problems before the age of 12. The symptoms have to be developmentally inappropriate. Myth versus fact. Myth. ADHD was made up by evil drug companies looking to turn profit on unsuspecting children. Fact. The first documented form of ADHD was involved in 1845 with the story of Fidgety Philip. 1902 was described as an impulsive behavior problem caused by genetic dysfunction, not by poor parenting. And while we're on this subject, Fidgety Philip. Let's see if I can't find that really quick. Story Nori. Fidgety Philip. Just seeing here. Looks like it was a book that was created in regards to it, or a children's story. I am not unfamiliar with that, but I'm seeing lots of stuff on it. I will have to take a look at that at my own free time, and you might want to too. Fact, drug companies may be contributing to rise in diagnosis. That is true. Those evil drug companies might be contributing to the rise in diagnosis. Fact, diagnostic criteria recently changed, which also contributes to the rise. As we get smarter with our doctors and figure out new things and ways to diagnose things, it makes sense that new kind of things will pop up in order to help increase diagnoses of previously unrealized problems. Fact, CDC expects 3 to 7% of the population to be impacted versus 11% currently diagnosed. What does that mean? CDC expects 3 to 7% of the population to be impacted versus, so the 3 to 7% of the population are going to be, who have ADHD are going to have significant problems throughout their lives, whereas the other percentage is not, is how I read that. Like our friend Jessica McCabe there, when she mentioned that she is going through a really difficult part of her life because of her ADHD. So she would be part of the 3 to 7% of the population that was impacted. And then the 8 to 11% that are not as impacted, I guess is how you would read that. Interesting stats. Things to think about. Myth versus fact. Myth: ADHD medications are overprescribed and can lead to substance abuse. The fact is, the American Medical Association's Council on Scientific Affairs found this to be inaccurate in 1998 and went on to find that students on ADHD medication abuse street drugs less often than their peers did who did not take similar medication. Did not take simulate medication. I'm pretty sure that's misspelled. Let me reread that. The American Medical Association's Council on Scientific Affairs found this to be inaccurate in 1998 and went on to find that students on ADHD medication abuse street drugs less often than their peers who did not take stimulant medication. That's what it probably is. And the gotcha. A 2013 study found that medication was overprescribed. Some controversy here. Well, there's always controversy in regards to medications and whether or not medications should be used or not. Always a sticky situation with your parents. If you are a special educator and you need to broach that subject, it's never really an easy thing to do. A lot of parents do have questions about how medications will affect their children in their lives. I know I had a friend who had a lot of concern about her own use of medication to treat her own ADHD. She had concerns about it in her own words, whether some of it's legal meth, is what she said, and what her concern was it. Which is some truth to that, and there is some truth not to. Lots of controversy, a lot of things to talk about your doctors with. Find out what the ins or outs are of different medications are with anything that you're taking. You really have to figure out what is good for you. That's always something I talk about with my parents in regards to that. Special education eligibility. To qualify for an IEP, a student has to have an identified disability under one of the 13 categories defined by the IDEA. The disability has to negatively impact their ability to receive an appropriate education. And just a reminder on the 13 disabilities, if I click on this article here, and I'll have this ready for class, here it is at a glance: specific learning disability, other health impairment, autism spectrum disorder, emotional disturbance, my speciality, speech or language impairment, visual impairment, deafness, hearing impairment, deaf blindness, orthopedic impairment, intellectual disability, traumatic brain injury, and multiple disabilities. Those are the 13 different categories in the DSM for disability categories under IDEA. Things to keep in mind. IDEA and ADHD in 1999. IDEA added ADHD as a qualifying condition under other health impairment. Other health impairment means having limited alertness, including a heightened alertness to environmental stimuli that results in limited alertness with respect to the educational environment that is due to chronic health problems such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. IDEA and ADHD. The purpose of school-based testing is to determine if students' disability is preventing them from receiving FAPE, a free and appropriate public education, and then to determine what needs to be adjusted in tier school programs so you can receive FAPE. And then there's another article here. Is this the same one? That's the same one, so don't worry about that. To determine ADHD, we use rating scales. Attention tests through the Wyatt or Woodcock-Johnson and the school psychologist. I have seen multiple of these rating scales. Everything I discussed in regards to the conditions needed in order to be diagnosed with an ADHD, you will see on questionnaires given to you by your school psychologist or whoever might be the professionals you are working with who are going to figure out if a student needs to get a special education through a diagnosis of ADHD. You get that test, the parent will get the test, the student will get the test, they'll cross and compare, and they'll figure out where to go from there. Happens fairly regularly. To determine a learning disability, we use the discrepancy model, a gap between IQ and performance, the Woodcock-Johnson or Wyatt. RTI, response to intervention. So, I have often used the Woodcock-Johnson myself to look at a student's academic tests, academic scores. It's something that you have to use on a fairly regular basis for triennials, for IEPs, for those of you who do not have special education here under your belt, where if you're not familiar with that, every 3 years a student has to have a triennial if they're receiving a special education. The teacher, the special education teacher, will often pull out that student or have a moment with the student somewhere else. It takes about 3 to 4 hours. Could take a couple days depending on how well the student is, but you'll test them, figure out some academic scores to present, and there will be a look at that academic scores and also with the questionnaires created by the school counselor. Now, if the academic scores show that the student is average to above average in their academic abilities and their behavior is not presenting a challenge inside the classroom, then typically a special education will not be needed. It will be decided that a special education might not be necessary for that student. However, if the student has okay test scores, but has behaviors in the classroom that might be affecting their ability to advance in the state's core curriculum, or other students' ability to advance in the state's core curriculum, that student may become eligible for a special education, where you might get behavior services, pull-out programs, move on to an SDC, things like that, depending on what that student needs and what's determined by the IEP team. And there's always going to be some form of response to intervention. If a student does not need a special education, they might just put him in the class, back in the classroom and let him be. If it's determined that he needs a special education, they might go to the special educator and say, little Johnny here needs to have some intervention services going for him. What kind of things are we going to do for him? And they might have little 30-minute pullouts to work on a particular couple of academic goals, or maybe some pullouts in order to work on some behavior stuff. Depends on what it is, and they'll do that for a month or two and see if it helps inside the classroom with conversations with the general education teacher. Lots of different things to look at in regards to those things, but we're typically looking at trying to keep a kid at as least of a restrictive placement as possible. The general education setting be the best way to go if we can do it, but sometimes you have to take those those steps to make it into a more restrictive placement, depending on what's happening with the student. Sometimes a 504 plan is used instead of a special education. 504 plans are formal plans that schools develop to give kids with disabilities medical needs and supports that they need. That covers any condition that limits daily activities in a major way. These plans prevent discrimination and they protect the rights of kids with disabilities in school. They're covered under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And yes, there is a little link there with that particular part that takes you to an understood.org website to talk about Section 504s. The Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a civil rights law that bans disability discrimination. It's also the law that provides 504 plans. Under Section 504, students with disabilities have the right to reasonable accommodations. If your child has learning and thinking differences, you may have heard of a law with an odd-sounding name, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. What does the law do, and how can it help your child? So on and so forth. Provides FAPE for students with disabilities in K through 12, which is a free and appropriate public education, so on and so forth. 504 plans basically is kind of a watered-down version of an IEP or a special education. There are things in there for students there to get services and things that might help them inside the class. Typically, though, this is something that districts use in order to keep students at a less restricted placement without giving services of moving them over to an SDC or more restrictive placement. It's kind of just the lightest form of quote-unquote special education, if you will, in regards to the paperwork and what kind of things teachers have to do. It just ensures that students have some form of services available to them that are discussed within that 504 plan. I haven't had a lot of work in 504 plans myself. I've always worked specifically just in special education in SDC classrooms. I was at a non-public school for 10 years. I've been at a separate program for 10 years also on top of that. I have never really seen a 504 plan cross my desk before, but it is something that is used generally at general education placement settings. If a student has an identified disability, such as ADHD, but does not need special education services to access the general education curriculum, then they are not eligible for an IEP. A 504 is part of a civil rights law, not an educational law, that seeks to remove barriers to a child's education. So what does this mean? What now? Let's take a quick look at what this does mean. That was loud.
Cool. Okay. Hi. My name is Steven Tonti, and I'm a director, and a writer, an actor, a drummer, scuba diver, soccer player, a camera operator, an airbrush artist, a physicist, a stargazer, a rock climber, a snowboarder, a model maker, a stage manager, a camp counselor, a PA, a DJ, a club president, a magician, and for a brief stint in May of 2012, I was called upon to repair 2 stopwatches which had stopped working. Who am I, you ask? My name is Steven Tonti, and I have ADHD. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, and I was first diagnosed with ADHD not by a diagnostician or a private practice or a pediatrician, but by a second-grade teacher who was interviewing me for a spot at the school she was working at. Now, you see, my family had just moved from New Orleans, Louisiana to Dallas, Texas, and I was in a search for a new academic home. Now, during this particular interview, this particular teacher received a message ahead of time from my first grade teacher back in New Orleans to check me for any signs of ADHD. And just as she reached the series of questions devised to evaluate whether a child between the ages of 5 and 17 is ADHD, wham! I fell out of my chair. No, I didn't slip. And no, the chair didn't crumble beneath me. You see, behind the teacher's desk was this giant window. And through that window was a giant field. And on that field were what appeared to me at the time to be hundreds of thousands of kids my age. And they were all playing with a great, big, inflatable rainbow beach ball. And as they played and moved all around the field, it was all I could do to keep track of them. So I leaned a little bit to the left, and I leaned a little bit to the right, and I leaned a little bit more to the left, and a little bit more to the right before disaster. I still maintain today that window was a trap and I was set up. So I was rejected from middle school because I was an 8-year-old boy who couldn't sit still in his chair. Oh, and there was this like complex marshmallow-related incident between myself and some of the staff there. But anyway, I ended up at the Episcopal School of Dallas, and over the next 11 years, I tried everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Extracurriculars. I tried computing, robotics, carpentry, canoeing, rock climbing, poetry club, logic club, poker club, comedy club, and camping. I went camping at least twice a year for 4 years, and band. Oh my God. I tried the trumpet, the saxophone, the piano, the electric bass, the stand-up bass, the guitar, both acoustic, and did I mention I played sports? It was Texas. We played sports. I tried all of them. And the drums. And I even took a short-lived stab at the harp. I played 7 different instruments. Played being a very generous term. When all of a sudden my school built a theater, and I thought, why not? So I started in the shop building sets, and then I moved to the sound booth, and then the light booth, and then my teacher asked me to act, so I played Conrad in Ordinary People. And then I said, can I direct? And she said, go for it. So I directed 12 Angry Jurors, because this is high school, people, and you can't direct 12 Angry Men with a drama school that has 3 boys and 4 girls. Yes, for the people doing the math at home, that's 7 drama students for a show with 12 in it. And before I knew it, I was auditioning and interviewing at drama schools across the country. And that's when Carnegie Mellon found me. And I love it here. I really do. But moving on. So what? So I have ADHD. And ADHD is misunderstood as an inability to focus. But it's much stranger than that. It's not a lack of focus, period. It's that I have a hard time selecting something and giving it my full attention. Something has to grab my attention, pique my curiosity, and then I can hyper-focus. Now, this is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because I have a hard time completing things that don't excite me. And we live in a world where you have to read your textbooks and pay your taxes. And yes, big textbooks with no pictures frighten me. And no one likes handling taxes. Well, actually, some of you might like that. But the upside is, when something does pique my curiosity, I become obsessed and I hyper-focus. I spend a lot of time with film. I can spend upwards of 12 hours in a row editing clips, sometimes until 6:30 in the morning. In the theater, when I have to put a show up, I'll pull 15-hour days for weeks on end, and I enjoy that. I love that. I can read a 500-page novel that I love much faster than a 1-page article I don't care for. It's easier for me to see the big picture. As a director, I have to track 20 people with very different jobs, from designers to writers to actors, and I find handling that much easier than finishing that 1-page article, which I'm still working on. David Neilman, the founder and CEO of JetBlue, who is also ADHD, mind you, says, I have a hard time doing the mundane things in life. I have an easier time planning a 20-aircraft fleet than I do paying my light bill. Yeah. So, another good thing about ADHD is, because I felt compelled to try everything, I was able to explore all the possible career paths I might not have, and might not have discovered what I truly want to do. So many teens and young adults are expected to focus on 1 or 2 fields of study, and 1 or 2 hobbies, and hope and pray they like the ones they've chosen, or that have been chosen for them. My job is to tell other people's stories, and I find an easier time doing that when I can draw from all of these other perspectives. It's easier for me to see the world through the eyes of a drummer because I've tried that. It's easier for me to see the world through the eyes of a graphic designer because I've tried that too. ADHD is a difference in cognition, not simply a disorder. We are attention different, not attention deficit. But because it is treated and misunderstood as a disorder, it's treated as something that needs fixing. So the idea seems to be that we need to get rid of my ADHD. But there's no getting rid of it, there's just sedating it. I was lucky. My high school teachers were hip, young progressives who were delighted to give me extra time, the additional attention, and the overall freedom to express myself the way that I felt necessary. So many other kids with ADHD aren't as lucky. For example, my roommate. Adam has been my roommate for 4 years. He is an excellent actor in the School of Drama and a brilliant thinker. We both grew up in Dallas, Texas, and we both have ADHD. Adam's high school was different. Now, even though he grew up only 15 minutes north of me, Adam's high school had harsher penalties for falling out of your chair. Now, you see, when you're a kid diagnosed with ADHD, your doctor administers a series of amphetamines, and everybody waits, because no one has a clue how you'll react. You might get more calm. You might become depressed. You might lash out at the people around you. Now, the difference between Adam and me is when a new medication may cause me to act out, my teachers immediately advise my doctors that I change my medication. However, when Adam tried a new medication, his teachers wrote this in his report. Adam is less motivated, less animated, and less involved in class activities, but at least he's quiet now. We need a healthier understanding of people with ADHD, and it starts at home. I had a mother and a father who supported every obsession. I distinctly recall my father asking one day, "Son, you're only 14. What could you possibly want with an air compressor?" To which I responded, "I want to airbrush t-shirts and shorts and sell them to my classmates and friends." All right then. And he would go out and he would get it, and I would play with it, and I would obsess over it. During the summers when I went off my medication and my body was wrecked with the effects of withdrawal, my mother sat by my side, literally coaxing the migraines out of me. With their support, I was able to explore, and my obsessions grew and multiplied, and I was able to maintain my sanity. Schools need to develop a better attitude towards students with ADHD as well, and there are plenty of examples out there. For instance, the Eagle Hill School in Hardwick, Massachusetts. The Eagle Hill School believes that every student can learn, that learning differently requires teaching differently, and that we must educate our kids, our students, to learn about learning in order to form new beliefs in a search for intellectual autonomy. Professors who act more as mentors as opposed to disciplinarians inspire me. When teachers level with me, I feel like I'm more in control, that there's a dialogue regarding new ways of thinking and approaching a problem, focusing, completing tasks. We have to create and develop a healthier relationship with medication. I think that Ritalin, Adderall, Concerta should only be prescribed to someone who can physically handle the effects of these drugs and their withdrawal. 12 is far too young. 16 is still too young. There are so many alternatives to medication. Studies have shown that for some, it's just an added weight or pressure to help them focus. And these things exist. There are weighted pads that help people feel more comfortable so they can complete tasks on time. For some people, it's tics like chewing pencils. So give them rubber-coated pencils. We have to teach kids to teach themselves. It's the best thing that we can do for our kids. And lastly, our society has to embrace cognitive diversity. For example, Special Eastern, or The Specialists, is a Danish organization that trains people with autism and ADHD as consultants in IT and other more technically oriented tasks and jobs. We have to turn this joke around on those who believe that my disorder divides me from my more normal peers. Besides, who here at Carnegie Mellon really qualifies as normal anyway? A great author, a masterful playwright, and a sublime poet once writ. Any guesses as to who I speak of? Shakespeare. Thou art correct. Shakespeare's Sonnet 121. 'Tis better to be vile than vile esteemed, when not to be receives reproach of being, and the just pleasure lost, which is so deemed not by our feelings, but by others' seeing. For why should others' false adulterate eyes give salutation to my sported blood? Or, on my frailties, why are frailer spies, which in their wills count bad what I think good? Nay, I am that I am. They that level at my abuses reckon up their own. I may be straight, though they themselves be bevel. By their rank thoughts, my deeds must not be shown, unless this general evil they all maintain. All men are bad, and in their badness reign. In Sonnet 121, Shakespeare condemns hypocrisy. He implores us not to let others' false adulterate eyes condemn us for something they believe us to be. He begs you not to let the selfish and negative comments of others hinder the just pleasures owed to you. A hierarchy of frailer spies have asked me to conform to society's means, and I propose the opposite. I propose let society conform to me, and I implore you to do the same. I'll leave you with something that Robin Williams, a poster child for us in the ADHD community, once said. We are all only given a little spark of madness. You mustn't lose it. Thank you.
I think that's a great video there. The big thing there that got me with that particular video is the idea that the teacher said, we don't know if that medication's helping him, but he's quiet. You know, I don't know about you all, but I've definitely had some students in my classroom where I'd just be like, oh, I'd kill for you just to be quiet for 30 minutes. Just relax, buddy. And, you know, it's a selfish thing to say because we want kids to be normal. We want them to feel good and safe and respected inside our classrooms. And it can be difficult at times when they're running around and kicking a backpack across the classroom because it got in their way, and then pretending to slap themselves and falling to the ground, pretending to die because that's what that kid does, and then he stands up and starts being goofy. I'm thinking of one specific kid in my classroom right now, and just it fits all those things. And it's like we need to teach them ways to deal with the things that they're feeling or doing, whatever have you, in order to be effective in the classroom. Are there ways to do that without medication? We see why things are all the controversy in regards to medications or how we're working with these students or what we're doing in order to help bring the best out of students. One of the best ways to work well with your students is teaching them the executive functioning skills they might be lacking in order to build up those particular skills to be more successful That's where you're going with that, successful in the classroom. What can you do to teach students impulse control? Are you going to have them sit at their seat calmly and raise their hand? Are you going to be able as a teacher to ignore your own impulse to answer blurted out questions randomly? That's one of the difficulties when you're trying to talk about students who blurt out answers and get your attention from there. I had that one student who said, the reason why I use this negative behavior is because it gets your attention. He knows what's up. How are you going to control that impulse control for the student? Are you going to teach them that? Are you going to have a little comic strip at their desk? Are you going to have them sit and practice a minute before school starts in order to remind little Jimmy, hey, you need to raise your hand before I answer your questions? Are you going to teach them how to wait until an appropriate break time to go sharpen their pencil so that they're not sharpening their pencil right when you're beginning to start to talk about the plans for the day? Think about those things. A lot of what impulse control can be controlled by is by your actions as a teacher with that particular student and front-loading things with him or her, or giving him the skills that person needs. How about emotional control? I have a couple of kids who are coming in hot from the playground. They're all jazzed up and going, woo, we had a great game, blah, blah, blah. And they come in and they're just being silly and being super loud and making it difficult for other students to get on task when they're coming back from lunch or break. I myself like to have some students stand outside for a minute or two real quick to say, hey, you guys have a fun time? Good. Are you guys ready to get going back onto the classroom? All right, let's take a minute here. Take some deep breaths. I'm going to send you in one at a time so you're both not going crazy, okay? Little Billy, you go in first. Ryan, are you ready to go? Okay, Ryan, let's go in next, and I'll walk in with them. These are things, obviously, if you have the ability, maybe you talk with your paraprofessionals about having that quick little minute check-in before they come in hot. Maybe you have a kid who has a history of coming off the bus, shouting and yelling and just going all sorts of craziness and things like that. Maybe you have somebody walk over and talk to him about his day before he comes in the classroom. A lot of front loading ideas when it comes to emotional control. Maybe you have a mindful minute with your class as a whole where everybody takes deep breaths and relaxes before you start your day. Planning, prioritizing. Maybe you have that file that shows them what the plan is for the day, the priming that we talked about earlier in the other class. Are you being flexible in how you're delivering material for your students? Are you giving them multiple ways in order to submit assignments? Are you giving them a chance to use a typewriter? Are you giving them a chance to use speech to text? Are you giving them a chance to use paper and pencil? Are you giving them a chance to do multiple choice as opposed to short answers? Lots of different things you can do. Working memory, that is a tough one. I have problems myself leaving for work and then going, darn it, I forgot my lunch back at home. What are you going to do that? Are you going to call the parents and say, hey, little Billy forgot his homework again. Can you set up some sort of schedule where you put the homework in the backpack for him? Or maybe have a little reminder schedule up there for him. Something along those lines. Self-monitoring, task initiation, organization, all these things. You can do things as a teacher in order to help get students the executive functioning skills they need in order to be successful with your class. We've talked a lot about this and some of the other ideas we talked about in class for the past couple of weeks. You can also develop behavior management strategies that help these things. Behavioral therapy, charts, rewards, positive reinforcement. Often you'll find behavior goals or a BIP in a student's special education IEP. Lots of different things you can find there. Maybe you have a behaviorist working with an individual. What kind of positive reinforcements are you giving the student? Are you giving them school bucks? Are you giving them positive praise? Are you giving them 5 minutes to stare at the goldfish in the back? Are you giving them time on the computer game? Whatever have you. What kind of rewards? What kind of charts? What are you doing in order to get students the behavioral services they need? Take the long view of development. All right. What we're looking at is the brain as it grows. A 5-year-old brain to a preteen brain to a teen brain to a 20-year-old brain. The brain does not fully mature until, I believe, 25 is the final age where the brain is considered fully matured. So all these parts in a typically developing individual at 5 years old is still developing, and they are not fully developed. And as we saw in the previous video, some of that stuff about the frontal cortex and the synapse is not really fully firing for students who have ADHD. Think about it that way, especially with your younger students. Provide accommodations and utilize technology. I heard some of you at the start of this class say that cell phones are a huge problem in the classroom. They're always on their TikTok. They're always on their text messages or their Discord apps or whatever have you, giving messages and things like that. Have you actually tried to utilize that technology into your classroom? Do you have students who have the ability to use Google Classroom in your class, and maybe you have them do lessons using laptops or cell phones and turn it in through class comments or to your email box? I'll tell you what, I like using that myself because it creates a lot less waste with all the paper and pencils, and we're trying to save trees, so I'm a big fan of myself of them using laptops or computer or cell phones when they can. Is there problems with it? Yeah. ChatGPT. I caught a student yesterday who was taking pictures of his math work, and there was an app out there, apparently, that will do the math for you after you take a picture. It was impressive that he knew how to do that wraparound. I'll tell you what. Was he necessarily learning anything from it? Questionable. I had to talk with him about it and say, hey, we want to see you do the work this time around. But it is interesting that that stuff is out there, and you need to know it as a teacher that that's one of the things that students might be trying to do when we talk about utilizing technology. You might need to have some life skills about what plagiarism is as well when we're talking about these things. It's one of the other big problems that I am noticing with technology is students tend to like to copy and paste into the work and call it their own. But you should be doing your best to provide accommodations that help students get the things they need. Calculators is always a common one, especially for math goals and IEPs. Speech to text is a common one for language arts goals. Using a spell checker is a common one for an accommodation in language arts goals, things like that. TPEs, some of the things we're looking at in regards to what this particular slideshow was looking at. Some of the look fors in regards to this. I'm not going to spend too much time in this because this is where we're going to get into breakout rooms for the big assignment for the day, okay? So we got breakout rooms. We're going to read about your spotlight student. After reading about your spotlight student, use the resources provided and develop a plan to support your student's executive functioning. Finally, develop a brief presentation and graphic using either Canva, Google Slides, paper and pens to present to the group. We're obviously not going to be able to do paper and pens. We're all in distance learning kind of style. So I would strongly suggest Google Slides myself. I just think it's the cleanest and clearest way and the easiest one for you to share. Join the breakout room about the student that interests you. So that's the end of the slideshow. So let's take a look at where the Spotlight student assignment actually is. So let's go to modules. And let's go to session 4. And let's go to student profile here and take a look here. So in your assigned group, using this student profile sheet, you will design a slide that showcases the following questions. What needs does this student have? What are this student's assets? How will you address this student's learning needs and build on their assets? That's one of the top things I do want to discuss real quick. We should always be focusing on the positives of our students. You might have the most difficult student you ever thought you have in the world, and that this kid is the worst student you could possibly ever ask for. Well, guess what? It is your job as an educator to find what that student is good at, because we want students to do well. We don't want them to fail. And they might be the most big pain in your booty that you could ever ask for, but you want that kid to do well no matter what. That is your job. Keep that in mind when we're talking about these kids. All right? So let's take a look at this. Copy of student profiles for ADHD. So in your breakout groups, one of the breakout groups is going to be working with Ariel. And here's a quick breakdown of the strengths and interests of Ariel and some general observations of Ariel from the classroom. Okay? Group challenge. Design a slide that beautifully showcases the following questions. What needs does this student have, and what are this student's assets? So you would look up here and bring these up and bring these up. Okay? How will you address the student's learning needs and build on their assets? So you're going to see what their deficits are. How are you going to build on those assets? What kind of things can you do inside your classroom or with yourself in general in order to help this student get accommodations they need in order to be successful? You can answer these questions in regards to lesson and project design as well as classroom management choices. Be sure to address how you will support this student's executive functioning and how you will provide UDL support in addition to individualized support. So one of the things I noticed in a lot of students, a lot of the interns in this class had questions about what exactly universal design for learning supports there are. This is a great time to look at some UDL strategies that you might use with this particular student. See, we have alternative seating, break cards, choice boards, choice spinners, things like that. So that's strategies for engagement. Strategies for representation. You might have students do a choral read or might make artifacts, or maybe they're kinesthetic learners and you bring kinetic sand into the classroom for them to use inside the classroom. strategies for expression, 6-second pause, allow for some regulation tools, some self-regulation, maybe some choice boards, or maybe some, well, if you have a student who needs Braille in order to read, that would be one thing to use. Enlarged equipment, lots of different things there that can help you. So here's a handy dandy list of a bunch of different things you can use inside your slide in order to get them some universal design learning strategies. You also see some great lists for accommodations that you would see inside the classroom for students, regardless of ability or disability. But if a student that you're working with has some math issues, here's some common math assignment accommodations right here. And you can see nice little lists highlighting pre-printed math problems, limit the need for showing work, extra space, avoid speed, blah, blah, blah. Lots of different things you can bring up for that. And so on and so forth. So you're going to get a lot of tools here to help you think about what kind of things you can use in order to bring up a student's deficits in their academic levels or behavior goals, okay? So that is what we're going to do. So one group is going to have Ariel here, and another group's going to have Sophia here, and you'll see that there's a very similar thing here. And then another group's going to have Sue, blah, 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 blah. So let's look back over here real quick. So in your assigned group, using the student profile sheet, which is, again, this, and whatever group you might be, you're going to be choosing, whatever group you are. If you're in my breakout group 3, you'll have Sue here, so you'll be working on Sue, okay? And you will design a slide that showcases the following questions. So you're going to have one slide that answers the questions, a second slide that answers these questions. You might have your first slide might be just your student in general here, right? You might take a picture of that and put it on your first slide and say, we are working with Sue today, blah, blah, blah. And there's your first slide. And your second slide will be this question, and your third slide will be that question, and then your fourth slide might be just the names of all your people in your group, so they have that for your information, and boom, you're good. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing. You're going to take that's going to be like a 20 to 30 minute thing there, all right? And then you will be done with that particular assignment, okay? Then finally, there is an exit ticket for exit ticket week 4. Below are typical exit tickets found in general education classrooms. With what you have learned tonight, what are 3 things you could do to modify, accommodate, heck, even change about the exit ticket for your students with ADHD? Name one important thing you learned in class today. What did you think was accomplished by the small group activity we did today? Ask one question about today's content, something that has left you puzzled. Today's lesson had 3 objectives. These would have been shared at the beginning of class, and you should still be available for referencing. Which of the 3 do you think was most successfully reached? Explain, or which one was not attained? Why do you think it was not? So, if I was doing this exit ticket, I would just go ahead and latch onto this one real quick and say, I'm going to choose to focus on this one for one of my exit tickets. And what I would do for this with my students with ADHD is shorten that particular question and make it more attainable. I might ask the student to give me one objective that was mentioned out of the 3 objectives and not ask them to give me all 3. And I might also say, why did you focus on just that one thing? And give me a brief 1-sentence answer. I would not give a student with ADHD a 3, 4, 5 question. I give him like 1 or 2 and make it as brief as possible. And bam, there's one of the things you would do for your exit ticket. Pick 2 more of these, figure out some ways to shorten and or accommodate and or modify that you would do for your student with an executive functioning challenge that might be presented from ADHD from this list here. 3 of those. Tell me how you would shorten, accommodate, or modify from the list of things that we've looked at in this classroom today. Okay? That's what you're doing for your exit ticket. Kind of a deeper thinking level thing here as well. And that's it. That's the week of a lesson there. That is that week's lesson. I wasn't really on my A game all that much today in this little dress rehearsal. I'm tired. Been a long week. So I apologize if you are watching this video for class. Hopefully you don't miss it so you don't have to watch it. And we will be good. All right? Everybody have a good day. Bye-bye.